Hello, friends. Chris Corsi here, President of Thrive Today, and I want to welcome you to the Relational Skills in Real Life podcast. Today's topic is on skill 19, recovering from complex emotions. That's right. This is the steep part of the mountain, friends. You might have spent some time growing joy and rest and practicing those foundational skills that we often call the foundational five. You might even be practicing how to get back to joy and peace from your upsets, but friends, the icing on the cake is how to recover when emotions combine. That's right. Emotions can combine and create a perfect storm of sorts, which creates a really difficult situation to be able to bounce back and recover from our upsets. And so, what this means is complex emotions are the merging of high energy emotions and low energy emotions. That's right. So, what that is likened with would be, imagine going down the road in your car and you suddenly decide to floor and press the accelerator all the way down and slam on the brakes. What can you predict is going to happen? Well, I'll tell you this much, it's not going to be good. And I wouldn't recommend doing that because what happens is pressing the accelerator and the brake, even for our nervous system, creates really tough conditions to be able to keep a homeostasis, to be able to keep shalom and peace going. And so our brain has to learn, how do I stay my best self while navigating complexity in the form of upsets and emotions and reactions that do form this perfect storm. And it makes it really hard for our nervous system and our brain and our bandwidth to be able to stay me while I feel these big upsets. And so you have two kinds of emotions here. You have fear, disgust, and anger, which are energy producing emotions. These are sympathetic responses. This is the accelerator for your nervous system that gives you energy, right? Just think about being mad at something. You get this quick burst of energy, right? In adrenaline. So these high energy emotions will then combine with low energy emotions, which are the parasympathetic responses for your autonomic nervous system. This would be like shame and sadness and despair. These are low energy emotions. Just think about feeling hopeless or maybe feeling ashamed. You just want to lay down, you lose your motivation, you lose your energy, you just want to lay around, right? You don't want to do a whole lot when you feel hopeless or maybe you're feeling some shame. Yeah, there's nothing fun about that, friends. And so when these emotions merge and combine, then what happens is you've got this really perfect storm of conditions that are going to make it hard for you to stay your relational self holding on to joy and peace. Well, I'm really excited about our guest today, my friend Chris Haven. Chris and his wife Celeste have attended our Thrive trainings. In fact, he's a graduate of our Thrive tracks. And you know what? You're going to kind of see some of his skills paying off in what he's going to share today about a time he experienced some really big emotions.
So, this is a story about how I returned to joy from humiliation. I was a young attorney. I was just recently out of law school and I was working at my first law firm. And I was to go to a real estate closing. And then after the real estate closing, I was to lead the clients in their car back to our legal office in my car. And so we left the closing and the clients were following me. And I was not really that familiar with the area. And this was a time before GPS. And so I thought I knew how to get back to the office, but it turns out I didn't. And so I was getting on the expressway and then I was getting off the expressway and getting back on again. And at one moment, I zigged off onto an exit and the client zagged and they stayed on the expressway and I lost the clients and they were no longer following me. And so when that happened, I just began to feel this immense amount of shame and embarrassment. I knew that those clients were not happy to be following me at this moment. And I also felt anger myself and frustration because I thought to myself, why didn't I print out directions before I left? Or why didn't my boss give me directions to how to get back to the office? He should have known that I didn't know where I was going. And so I drove back to the office, and all the while I was just feeling um, this feeling of just being drained, and I was also at the same time though gripping the steering wheel in just anger and just feeling the tenseness of that. And so as I walked into the office when I got back, I was just feeling this immense amount of humiliation, just this shame and anger mixed together. And I walked up to my boss and began to talk to him and tell him what had happened. And as I began to talk to him, I began to realize that, this wasn't the end of the world. And eventually the clients would get there and we would be able to continue the transaction that we had worked out for that afternoon. So I began at that point when I began to feel that way, my body began to loosen and I began to feel this peace and even joy at that moment, even though I was still feeling a little bit of shame and a little bit of anger. And when those clients came into the office, that hadn't really all gone away, but I was able to relate with them and act like myself, even though I was still feeling a little bit of that humiliation. And so that is how I returned to joy from humiliation.
Well, wasn't that something, friends? I told you, Chris, he's quite the storyteller here. He's demonstrating his skills by how he shared this humiliation story. These are really tough conditions, right? These are really intense conditions for Chris because he had a responsibility, something very important that he was supposed to do by helping the clients. Then they got lost, and then Chris had to go back to the office and face his boss. And you know what? This is not a fun situation, but I really admire how Chris's character shines through this example because he was able to come back to himself. He was able to return to joy and peace. He was able to recognize, you know what, this is not the end of the world. That's actually a good sign. That thinking is a good sign that his relational circuits are coming back on, even though he was feeling these big emotions, right? The big shame and big anger. These were pulling on his relational emotional capacity. Yet he was able to stay his relational self, which was a big deal. He was able to calm down. He was able to put words to his feelings and his experience. And in a sense, he returned to his right mind. So he recovered. Now, keep in mind, he was still, remnants of these feelings were still very much present, right? He was still feeling this stuff, but he was able to return to joy and peace. He was able to interact with the boss and interact eventually with the clients. And it really reflects Chris's heart and his values in this example, which is a beautiful reminder of relational skills. Relational skills really help the good stuff to shine that God has placed in us. Like, that's a big deal. Now, imagine had Chris not been able to bounce back and recover, maybe he would have gotten mad at his boss and said or done some things that he would later regret. Or he could have justified himself, or he could have, destroyed the relationship with the client. So this could have gone a lot of different directions. But Chris, his skills, his capacity, his training paid off in this example. And it's such a good example. So ultimately, our brain has to learn, how do I feel these feelings, share these feelings, and quiet these feelings, right? Even when these emotions combine in complexity. Now, there's a couple important things to know about skill 19, recovering from complex emotions. First, if you don't practice the emotions individually, you're not going to handle it when they combine. So what this means is I have to grow some joy and some quieting and some peace and shalom to increase my capacity. And I have to work on recovering from individual emotions, right? Like sadness, anger, disgust, and what we call the big six. So we have to get really good at managing those emotions so that when they show up and they combine, we're ready for that fight. We're ready to stay ourselves relationally and find joy and peace even in the midst of it. So, friends, this is why we have different training tracks at our Thrive training. So the first track one, is all about growing capacity. The second track is really fine tuning those return to joy skills. And the third track is not only training others in these skills, but it's learning solutions for pain. So the good news is we can all grow our capacity by practicing these foundational skills of learning to be relational, learning to build some joy and to quiet and rest, to practice appreciation, and to be able to see some of what God sees. Those are foundational skills that we talk a lot in our resources at our website at thrivetoday.org. You know what? You could learn more about Skill 19 as well in our website. Go to the relational skills page, click on Skill 19, and you'll learn more about these skills. And you know what? Join us. Join us for one of our in-person Thrive trainings where you can grow capacity in track one, learn return to joy in track two, and then learn to recover from complexity in track three, as well as solutions for pain. Friends, this is life changing stuff. And I hope that this is the start of something good for you.